Welcome back to But This Time It's Different, the show where we unpack political theatre, economic pantomime, and the quiet erosion of anything that was once considered sacred. I'm Sinead, a space and defence economist, an investor, and someone who believes that Air Force One should come with a minimum decency threshold and an onboard therapist. And not the kind of onboard therapist that Elon Musk has on his private jets.
And I'm Alex, a London-based finance and technology writer. And yes, someone who has apparently learned you can gift a presidential aircraft just like a signed football.
So today's episode is Air Force One. And I don't mean the Harrison Ford version, although I did watch this movie as prep for this episode. Fun fact, this movie actually made more Americans believe there's an escape pod than any Pentagon press briefing ever has. So we're talking about the real plane, the flying command center, this kind of long-standing symbol of American continuity, the kind of nuclear football with wings. And we're obviously talking about it now in 2025 because it's being repurposed into something no one quite saw coming. It is a political accessory, this kind of foreign finance, taxpayer retrofitted, gifted, grifted, personally branded endeavor.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the strangest foreign policy gifts of the decade. I think it rivals that Central Asian republic that gave Putin the huge pyramid of watermelons, if you remember that video from a couple of years ago. But yes, the royal family of Qatar, or Qatar, as the Middle East snobs in my life always tell me I meant to say it, has offered to donate a luxury Boeing 747-8, nicknamed the Flying Palace, to the United States with the explicit understanding that will be used by Donald Trump as Air Force One and then transferred to his presidential library after he leaves office. And if you're thinking that sounds a little bit unorthodox, you would in fact be right. It's not entirely normal for a Gulf monarchy to equip a sitting US president with a replacement Air Force One at all in general, but then to let him keep it is taking it one step further. So it's arguably not just a plane, but a $400 million campaign prop with an emoluments clause problem.
Right. And the aircraft is 13 years old and packed, as far as we know, with gold trim and Gulf state luxury, which honestly sounds pretty tacky, probably right up Trump's avenue, and is going to be retrofitted by the US Air Force. So the Pentagon gets it first, and somehow Trump's foundation gets it next. And then the lines between diplomacy, branding, and soft, albeit maybe a little bit harder bribery, are starting to blur at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, so today we're asking who gets to fly the symbol of the presidency, who gets to keep it, and what happens when Air Force One becomes a hand-me-down from one foreign state to another. So before Air Force One became a branding opportunity and apparently a prize, it was something a little bit more old school. It was a mobile command center designed to keep the US government functional during a nuclear war. Like, not metaphorically functional, literally functional. So the plane was actually built to survive electromagnetic pulses, carry confidential comms infrastructure, and let the president run a war while eating a steak 35,000 feet above a dying world.
And the term Air Force One is actually just a call sign. Technically, it refers to any Air Force aircraft carrying the president. But over time, it kind of became shorthand for one of the most iconic symbols of American statehood, right up there with the Oval Office, the flag, and I hate to say it, but Joe Biden's aviators.
Oh, I'd forgotten about him. So the history is long and a bit complicated. FDR was the first US president to ever get on board an aircraft and fly somewhere. So I think that was in 1943 when he went to the Casablanca conference during World War II, where he went on a flying boat. Eventually, the Air Force got a little bit upset that the Navy was flying the president around. They sort of put their oar in and wanted an alternative. So originally, the plan was to fly him around on a converted B-24 bomber. The Secret Service then kind of deemed this to be insufficiently safe. So eventually, the first presidential plane was born in the form of a Douglas VC-54C, nicknamed Sacred Cow, and it had a ramp for FDR's wheelchair and a pressurized cabin, which in 1945 was cutting-edge technology, even though it now exists basically everywhere.
And it actually, this Sacred Cow exists in the Air Force Museum in Ohio. I know this because I was looking at a friend of mine's photos from the museum visit last week, and we talked about this aircraft extensively. Fun fact for any aviation people out there, this is a derivative of what was growing up my favorite aircraft, the DC-3. Okay, so after came Eisenhower's Lockheed Constellation, which was codenamed Columbine 2, the first aircraft to actually be called Air Force One, after a near mid-air disaster caused by overlapping call signs with a commercial flight. Not that we ever get any of this anymore.
Nope,
And
never.
after Eisenhower came JFK. This ushered in what can only be described as the golden age of presidential branding.
Raymond Loewy, the industrial designer who did everything basically from the Shell logo through to the Greyhound bus, one of those sort of real Renaissance men you just don't seem to get anywhere these days. He was brought in to redesign the aircraft's look, and this is where you start to get the simple blue and white livery, the all caps United States of America, the perfectly centered presidential seal. It was kind of clean, confident, not flashy, and symbolized a nation that was at least pretending to be relatively at ease with its place in the world.
Yeah, so this was obviously much more of a soft power flex. The US didn't really feel, especially after World War II, and it kind of owned every other country that had bailed out after the war. Didn't really need to turn up and say, we have arrived, we are big, amazing. I mean, monetary policy already dictated that. Every time Air Force One landed abroad, it kind of said something more like, we're here, we're stable, we are still the empire, but we're going to be polite about it. And that kind of discipline designed for continuity stuck.
Yeah, the contrast in my head that immediately appears is how the UK still does not have an equivalent, and prime ministers have persistently wanted one, but have been told that it's too flashy, so they have to fly on these kind of converted military aircraft. When Tony Blair wanted one, it was dubbed Blair Force One, and seen as this desperately extravagant sort of America-brained move.
Well, we're going to go down a notch, because when the Prime Minister of Ireland flew to Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago for arguably its biggest week of the year, St. Patrick's Day, and that week, he took a first-class flight on a commercial airline, and people were outraged that our Prime Minister was flying first class. So Ireland is not even thinking about private jets or special military aircraft. We're like, get the Prime Minister to the back of the cattle haulage.
Yeah, he could be a feature on a Ryanair Twitter post sort of any day now. But yes, the Americans, at least, I think, very much into the grandeur of the presidency, and the plane grew in that way. It became this floating metaphor, maybe flying metaphor for American presidential power. So it was the plane that Nixon resigned on, the plane where LBJ was sworn in, the plane that took Bush to ground zero, and the plane that Obama used to stage some pretty aesthetic presidential photo ops, and, well, one that Bill Clinton used for a quick getaway during scandals.
Yeah, this is a plane that clearly has gravitas until it started becoming a personal brand accessory. And so for most of their history, Air Force One stood for something much more serious than branding, which was, again, continuity, but more so command. The idea that somewhere in the sky, even and especially during nuclear war, America still functioned mostly. It was the flying symbol of adult supervision. Like there's nowhere that the president could be that we are not going to be taken care of. And this has significantly changed.
So to understand how we're in this slightly unusual situation where a Gulf monarchy is gifting the United States a presidential aircraft, it's worth taking a little bit of a step back. So there isn't just one Air Force One plane. There are a couple. There are two aging VC-25As that are still just about doing the job. Boeing is meant to be refitting another aircraft, but that's not going entirely well, as we'll touch on in a moment. And then Qatar is stepping in to donate another. So, Sinead, would you like to take us through exactly what's going on over at Boeing here?
Well, I would be shocked if anyone could tell you what's going on at Boeing, but I'll try. Okay, so here we're going to focus on the VC-25B program. This is also known as the supposedly up-and-coming Air Force One, also known as Boeing's $5 billion shit show and exercise in advanced disappointment. So the original idea, as ideas always are, was very simple. You're going to take two new Boeing 747s that are already built and retrofit them with EMP shielding, in-air refueling, secure comms, classified electronics, all the cool shit that Air Force One needs. Let's not forget that it's going to include a presidential bedroom that doesn't look like it was designed by a Marriott intern. Okay. The timeline for this was supposed to be 2024, and the budget was originally roughly, let's just call it $4 billion. But we're going to deal with Boeing inflation here, and we should probably do a podcast on Boeing's inflation. The actual delivery is going to be at least 2027 if they get their shit together, probably 2029, which is more likely. And the cost, I mean, at this stage, who knows? But let's just say it's not $4 billion anymore.
Shocked to hear that the guys at Boeing failed to get the job done, considering the very easy ride they've had from the media, regulators, and shareholders over the past 10 years. But this isn't just a classic Boeing screw up, although I think it has many of the elements of that. The president himself has added in an extra layer of complexity when he personally got involved in the design program, including requesting a total redo of the paint job, the interior, the bedroom layout. The Air Force apparently wasn't keen on this, but, Boeing, as all contractors, are like, sure, we will take your money to make this worse and more complicated. So the rest of us are now just staring at these sort of Air Force steakhouse-like renderings.
Okay, so I'm going to be that person in defense of Boeing. I'm going to play both sides here. So I mean, this has become a symbolic culture war. I feel like it's so easy to shit on Boeing. So Trump wanted bold. Right. And this is why we do it nonstop. So Trump wanted the bold kind of red, white, blue, the very I'm here to sell hats and maybe start a war, maybe grift something. The Air Force wanted to go back to Loewy's timeless pale blue and white. This kind of classic, subtle, don't panic during a briefing vibe, right? Eventually, the Pentagon under Trump won, sort of. Okay, we're keeping the old paint, right? But not before wasting 2 years and racking up at least $50 million in design change fees, which is speak for we argued over vibes in a hangar. And let me explain. What Trump wanted was not actually feasibly possible. For example, this new paint job that he wanted would quite literally have destroyed the structure of the aircraft. And the Air Force had to say, actually, if we implement the changes that you want, we're not going to have this Air Force One secure aircraft that you want. So this has been a push and a pull from both sides.
Can a paint job destroy the structure of an aircraft?
So it's a long story, but basically because of the speeds that the aircraft was designed to go at, the paint would have come off. I mean, dumb stuff. But this was a $50 million issue that they had, or at least one of them. I think that the entire redesign of the bedroom, which was very important for him, was another.
Yeah. At the risk of upsetting the Boeing defender on this podcast, it is fair to say that they haven't done a particularly good job of running this program as well. So we've had the usual supplier issues, software failures, and one which I came across was incompatible wiring harnesses. And I didn't really know what this meant initially. And I dug around some aviation-related forums, and it turns out this basically translates as, we plugged some stuff in and it caught fire, which is obviously what you want for something like this.
Okay, well, while Alex, you are poking around some aviation forums looking at the small print, I'm looking at the top line numbers, right? And at one point, Boeing reported $660 million loss on the program, which they called a routine setback. So if you mean by routine that, we accidentally created the most expensive stationary object since the Roman Empire, sure. They had more than $500 million loss on something that does not even exist yet.
So, and again, this is not just a jet. This is supposed to be a nuclear warplane, part of, the United States' first line of defense that lifts the president above the ashes of Washington, D.C. if it becomes a parking lot. Right now, if the sirens go off, he'd probably just have better odds chartering a flight and hoping the pre-check still works.
Right. Pre-check is so broken, by the way. Let's do something on that. But okay, so the VC-25B was supposed to be this kind of all-amazing symbol of modernized command and resilience. And instead, in the most American kind of late-stage bureaucracy and capitalism way possible, it is just a plane that is stuck in a procurement coma somewhere between some PowerPoint deck on some intern's hard drive and this garage fire that you talked about.
Yeah, so we heard Biden flying around on two 34-year-old 747s, which were, positively youthful compared to him. Trump gearing up to fly on a Gulf-sourced workaround, and a new Air Force One that's still a theoretical work in progress. I mean, if anything, this is at least great comfort to people like us who are primarily based in Europe and have had to endure interminable lectures from American VCs about how Europe doesn't know how to build things. No, turns out
Absolutely.
they're not so good at it either.
So this is a logistical farce, right? And it's kind of wrapped up in taxpayer money. And then you have this kind of coat of Boeing on top of it, which does not scream confidence. And it's kind of all held together by PR statements and probably more than one or two prayers. So, Alex, I want to get to the part about the gift, right? We've talked about the Boeing shit show. Let's talk about the gift. This isn't like some kind of old 747 that used to be a Ryanair aircraft. This is a Qatari royal family owned Boeing 747-8. As we said, it's called the Flying Palace and it's donated to the United States for the temporary use of Donald Trump as Air Force One. And then afterwards, it's being transferred to the Presidential Library Foundation. Now, I'm not sure he even knows how to read, but okay. So this foreign monarchy has gifted a potential aircraft to Trump. So here's the $400 million question. Why in the hell is Qatar giving this luxury aircraft with gold on gold to the US government with the express intention that Donald Trump will fly it? Let's remember that this offer was not made during the last presidency, simply during this one. What's the angle?
I think you're just a very cynical person, Sinead.
Clearly.
Qatar is just like, it's a very generous country. And they've given planes to world leaders before. So they gave one to Erdogan in Turkey in 2018. And they actually gave one to Saddam Hussein, remember him, back in 2000. But if we're not prepared to take that altruism at face value, we can sort of look at the very interesting role Qatar plays in the wider region. In short, it plays small state geopolitics really, really well, which is not an easy game to play. It's essentially chess with live ammo, and they don't really give out gifts without expecting anything in return. They place bets, and for some reasons, they seem to think that Donald Trump might be a good bet. So this is ultimately about leverage, legacy, and ensuring that no matter who wins in Washington, they remain indispensable.
Okay, well, I'm going to stay cynical, and I'm going to say that reason number one, and we're going to start here with the hard power. Let's think about the fact that Qatar is home to Al Udeid Air Base, and this is the largest US military installation in the Middle East, which is obviously a place of keen interest. Okay, so think over 10,000 US military personnel, and it serves as CENTCOM's forward headquarters, functions as the launch pad for operations across Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, all of which are places of interest for the US. The US has also invested over $8 billion into the infrastructure here since the early 2000s. Okay, and Qatar, for its part, has spent nearly $2 billion in recent years actually upgrading the base to make sure that Washington has no reason to leave the area.
Yeah. So in short, we house your drones, don't ignore our phone calls.
Now, who's the cynical one, Alex? Okay. Reason number two is that Qatar walks this razor thin line between ally and irritant. So yeah, sure, they host the US military, but they also bankroll Hamas, they host Taliban officials, and they operate Al Jazeera, which every Gulf monarchy hates and every Western liberal arts grad assigns in class.
In short, it's the diplomatic Airbnb of the region. And so we saw this, as you made reference, with the Taliban. So they hosted Taliban-US peace talks back in 2020. They were involved in sort of negotiating the hostage releases for the Israel-Hamas conflict. And historically, Hamas's political bureau was actually housed in some incredibly nice luxury hotels in Doha. You just don't ask a man his salary, a woman her age, or where Hamas officials suddenly got the money required to pay for all of this. They sell Germany its natural gas after it got cut off from its Russian oil lifeline. And they somehow convince everyone it's part of the same strategy. And as you alluded to with Al Jazeera, they are not loved by their neighbors. So back in 2017, Saudi, the UAE, and Bahrain cut off diplomatic relations with Qatar. They closed their borders. They shut down local Al Jazeera stations. And in short, this was because they were convinced, not without reason, that they were funding the Muslim Brotherhood, whose influence across the region they are like very, very nervous about for historic reasons. And so I think Qataris have had this long-standing strategy of winning over US institutions. So even if you go back to earlier in the 2000s, they were funding these very, very aggressive lobbying campaigns in DC. They were giving lots of money to quite prominent US foundations and think tanks and universities. But I think that kind of blockade experience, even though that's sort of subsequently been lifted in the last few years, really freaked them out and has led them to double down.
Yeah. And so what you're talking about is basically making sure that they're too useful to marginalize here, okay? Because this kind of pretending that they're all part of the same strategy with the West and the East and the Middle East kind of only works because they become too strategic to sanction to each of these individual players, and they're kind of too wired in to ignore. And in the case that any of this starts to slip and they lose their relevancy, well, yeah, there's a 747 coming your way.
Yes, and they got to this position where they were able to become too useful to marginalize by, in short, being incredibly rich. They are the world's third largest exporter of natural gas after the US and Russia. Sovereign wealth fund, QIA, is worth over $475 billion. It has holdings in Volkswagen, Barclays. Well, it used to have them in Credit Suisse, but pour one out for those guys. BlackRock, Heathrow Airport, lots of luxury hotels, half the London skyline. But yeah, their hand is sort of basically everywhere. And I think, again, this is one of the reasons their neighbors aren't entirely keen on them.
Alex, are you trying to say that there's a correlation between being rich and being powerful? But no, they're not just buying buildings. They're buying insulation from this regional backlash, from their instability, and from diplomatic fallout for each of their weird strategies that they're pursuing simultaneously. And since US foreign policy can turn on a dime or a tweet, as we know with Donald Trump, Qatar doesn't leave that to chance. So they have donated to US think tanks, they've funded academic chairs, and made strategic infrastructure gifts like, I don't know, presidential planes.
Yeah, it's the diplomatic version of buying carbon offsets, except for realpolitik. Although with carbon offsets, some people do occasionally question their value.
Yeah, it's on the same grift line. Anyway, but let's not forget, Qatar also hosted the 2022 World Cup, and that was the most expensive in history, costing over $220 billion. I don't even know if I watched any of it, but this was a real soft power masterstroke and kind of both sand and spectacle, right? This is not just a country that is shy about symbolic assets. They build museums with no visitors. They build airports with no aircraft that fly through them. And now possibly the first Air Force One with it donated by Qatar, plaque somewhere behind the cockpit.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I don't know anyone who's gone to Doha for anything but work reasons and who was not incredibly grudging about it, but maybe it's delightful. But yes, the goal is not just influence, but immortality. And long after the energy demand drops, regional alliances shift yet again. They want their fingerprints on every power center that matters, including Washington.
Yeah, and let's be honest, this is actually not just about generosity. It's more about contingency planning. So to recap, the aircraft designed to unify the presidency and kind of project this all-American continuity and power, this plane that's meant to survive nuclear war and signal leadership and carry this constitutional weight of the office and the entire world in many ways, is being leapfrogged. Not by the long-awaited Boeing replacement, because honestly, let's not hold our breath for that one, by a 13-year-old private jet, once owned by a foreign monarchy, now rebranded, refitted, and retroactively justified as a gift.
First, the US Air Force will spend tens of millions of dollars militarizing it, and then seamlessly to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation, like a commemorative plate.
Yeah, and maybe you're thinking, okay, it's a plane, it flies, it's not like America hasn't blurred ethics before. But here's why this actually matters. This is more about the slow erosion of symbolic power than just using and abusing an aircraft. Air Force One used to be this flying embodiment of command and power, and now it's little more than a sponsored asset. This kind of foreign finance workaround for a political figure that faced multiple criminal indictments was handed the keys to militarily modified aircraft with Pentagon support and diplomatic approval.
I actually think you're onto something with the sponsorship model. I think foreign allies and, well, frenemies sponsoring military assets could be the way forward, especially for cash-strapped European militaries. Like, the Germans can't get tanks in time. Like, maybe a friendly state with an agenda could sponsor them. Same with, naval destroyers or replacing Europe's, ballistic missile shield once the Americans pull back. I think there's probably something in this. Just outsource national symbolism to whoever is the nicest stuff. Let's do it.
I mean, at least then it would get done.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to wrap it there. That's it from But This Time It's Different, and we will be back next time. See you soon.